So we're back, and in this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about Grandmaster Carron and some of the things he used to do. Like I said, there's a million things they used to do. One of the things I want to talk about with Tim, and for those who had the opportunity to work with him, you know where I'm going with this, with what I'm talking about. And one of the things about Tim, when you worked with him, Tim had a different touch. Let me just tell you, he had a different touch. And Tim would be working with you, and he would do things to you and hook you in ways, especially like when I was first learning to work with him, and he would do things and you'd be like, what the heck? So one of the things with Tim didn't like to get close to people. And what I mean by it, he didn't like getting close to people. It was just his idiosyncrasy. His thing was, because he had long arms and he was strong as an ox, trust me, he was strong in ways that made no sense. You know, he could handle all his business out here if he wanted to. And so I would ask him, you know, how come you never really let me get close? And he would just kind of smile and smirk and say, well, you know, I only let people get close if I initiate it. And I said, what do you mean? He says, if you're here, you know, and I can take care of you here, fine. He says, I really don't like people getting close. He says, but if I want to get close, and then he would move in, clear your hands, get in here, and this is where he would start what we call finishing moves. So very few people had an opportunity to work with Tim and understand the finishing moves and how he did this stuff. Now John could do this stuff too, but John was kind of, you know, a little loath to do it because, you know, people would spaz out and he wasn't trying to hurt people. Whereas Tim, he kind of didn't care. If you got hurt and you weren't doing what he wanted you to, well, you kind of did to yourself as far as he was concerned. But when he would do finishing moves, it was all based on his knowledge and understanding of how the body worked. I was working with a client recently, and he had worked with Tim for a short period of time. And he was asking me because there were these things that Tim did to him. And he was just blown away. And he realized everything that Tim did would just be so awful that he knew he was going to die if Tim wanted him dead. I said, yeah, if he wanted you dead, you know, but he probably didn't want to kill you because then he's got to deal with a body and all that stuff. And, you know, his back hurt and all that stuff, right? So, but what Tim would do, and I'm not going to even get into all the stuff he did or that he showed me, because that'll probably be at some point the subsequent, you know, workshop I'll do. I've done one already on finishing moves, but Tim would get into these positions, and because he was feeling his way through, he didn't need 5,000 grappling techniques where he had to practice them 5,000 times or 100,000 times to get good at them. Because when he would flow, and this was an important aspect of the contact flow exercise, which I think too many people have screwed up, because he could feel the pattern of the movement, he could feel the relationship. He didn't need to, if he wanted to do a wrist lock, reach over and grab or something like that. He could feel these things within the movement itself and make them work, where he could catch you in these crazy positions and make this stuff work. And the reason he could do it was because he was never trying to just grab and twist you. He could feel how your body wanted to move, just do whatever you want. And he would catch you. And he would do things like this, cross your arms, and then he would do the double dragon and hit you across your neck with both hands. I remember the first time, I'm not going to hit you hard. I'm not going to hit you. First time Tim did this on me, I was like, the hell? I mean, it hurt, but he, you know, obviously wasn't trying to kill me because I wouldn't be here. And I laughed. I said, why would you do that? He says, well, this will work and this will work. So I did both. I mean, it's just the way his mind worked. If it was physically possible for you to do it, he just did it. He didn't care. So he didn't have these preordained, or at least many preordained kind of things he did. They were just things he could do, and I believe, again, because they were a function of his body. For those who have the, I don't know how you describe the pleasure or displeasure, one of his favorite things he would do, especially if you were trying to keep away from him, is he would shift his body on these weird angles, and he would bring that hand around and whack you right in the back of the neck. One of the favorite ones that I saw him do. And you got to have the reach to pull this off. And I want to be clear. Some of the things I can do, I can only do because I got a long enough reach. Just like with Tim. Some things he could do, and that was a part of his idiosyncrasy. But Tim would be like this. And it makes me laugh because he hit me like 1,000 times like this. And he would go like this, and he would lean, and he would put his shoulder on you. But he would take his hand, his opposite hand, and he would bring it behind his own head. And he would bring it around his head and hit you in the back of the neck. And you're just like, what? Sometimes you would even see him do it, and you couldn't do anything about it because he was pushing against your body, breaking your balance, and you couldn't run. So he kind of made you watch your own death, you know? And so I asked him, why would he do that? And he said to me, he said, you know, he says, nobody expects it. He says, so I bring it around. He says, if I can do this, I can do this. And I said, yeah, but, you know, I mean, isn't that kind of cumbersome? He said, well, you think I don't know where my own head is? And I just laughed, and I thought about it. I said, right. You know, like he would do things and, you know, just do what you want. And he would do stuff like this and like that and not even be looking. And I was like, how did you do that? You know, you weren't even looking. And he's like, I could feel your hands. You think I don't know your hand is there? So what I started realizing when Tim would say these things was he had a sense of bodily awareness about himself, both internal and external, where he always knew where another person's, not just their hands, where another person's body was in relation to his body, where he only needed to kind of get the vapors of where you were to do whatever he needed to do. Absolutely amazing ability. And what I started realizing too, and I'll touch on this in probably subsequent episodes as I go along, because I'm just making this up as I go along as well, is Tim was a master at modeling. And Tim actually taught me how to model John. You know, everybody else was looking at John and like, oh, what is he doing there? Tim always told me to watch what he was really doing, no matter what he said. You know, for those who train with John, you know, John could use the same word like 5 times for 5 different things, but if you didn't understand the context in which he was presenting it, then, you know, you got confused because you weren't paying attention to the context. And Tim told me, he says, you know, watch what he's doing, because some of these things he's doing, because I would ask him, I said, I'm confused. John said this, John said that. He says, well, you got to understand, some of this stuff is not easy to explain. So he's explained as best he can, but if you watch what he's doing, you get what he's getting at. And like, you know, you're right. And so when John would do things, the context of how he did stuff was crucial. And so Tim learned how to model what John was doing, not mimic. A lot of people, you know, when they watch more advanced guys, or when they watch John or they watch Tim, they always try to mimic and copy what he was doing. You never want to mimic people. Here's why. First of all, you're not them. So you don't know why they made the choices they made when they made them, based on how their body feels. Number 2, you're not in the situation where the context of what you're experiencing when you're dealing with another person is the same as theirs. So if you're just copying what they do, you know, you're only doing what you think they were doing without any understanding of why they made the choice the way they made it and how in the body they're actually moving to make it work. This is the reason why sometimes you would see John or even Tim. Sometimes Tim's arm would look like it would come wide, and people say, well, Tim's doing this, and I'm looking like, no, that's not what he's doing. And what Tim would do, I'll do it on this side, so you can see it in the camera. Tim never did this kind of thing. It only looked like that as your ass was trying to run away to get out of the way. What he would do is he would turn his body, and he would follow the contour. As he cleared your hand, he would follow the contour of your body. So as you try to lean away or get away, because his arm never made this wide arc, but actually came up almost kind of in a very shallow arc as he rotated his body. This is why you couldn't get out of the way, because by turning his body and just bringing his arm up and moving as little as he needed, it gave him the ability to make adjustments along the way. In other words, if you ran, as Tim would say to me, if you run, you'll die tired. You know? And so he could bring it around. So the reason why I always looked from your perspective like this big arcing movement, because you were trying to get out of the way. So you're doing this, and you can't get out of the way. And all you see is this big hand come and hit you. And of course, those who've been hit in the side of the head or the back of the head, or in the back, or in the chest, or in the liver, and all the other 5,000 places Tim would hit you. You know, it felt like you were getting hit with a frying pan. You know, literally like an iron skillet, because you could just hit that hard. So when I'm doing this stuff, I recognize, so see what's going on here? As he's bringing his arm around, as I try to run, even as I'm trying to block it, All he's doing is adjusting to what I'm doing, and Tim would do stuff like that. John would do stuff like that too, where he would touch your arm, or what he called touch and go. Brilliant stuff. Touch and go. And he would take that step and he would be here. And before you know it, and of course, he'd hit you with his belly and he'd just wail on you. Don't get me started. I've suffered that humiliation many times where he would be here and his belly would be here. And somehow, before you knew it, you were here, his belly was on your back, he's bending you over, and you feel like your spine is going to explode as he's putting pressure. An absolutely amazing ability. To this day, I'm just telling you, straight up, I've never dealt with anybody. I don't care. I'm not saying there aren't people who can't do it. Don't get me wrong. I've never dealt with anybody who can disappear right in front of you like John could. Where literally, like, you've watched videos, you'll even see this happen to me where John would be moved and John would move and I'll get caught in basically catalepsy. And I'll talk about that in future episodes because as far as I'm concerned, and I've said this in blog posts and other places, as far as I'm concerned, John Perkins, hands down, was one of the greatest hypnotists ever to live, even though he hated hypnosis and hated the whole concept, but yet he did it on people all the time. Both he and Tim could put people in catalepsy and trance like that. Tim would put you in trance through touch. John could do it without even touching you. It was absolutely amazing ability. And if you modeled and understood how that worked, you could actually learn how to do that skill. I'm not saying you're going to do it as well as them, but you don't need to be as good as them at any of the things that I'm talking about to be very, very formidable if you had to take on someone, because in the microsecond they have to figure out what you're doing, you're already punching them in the throat, and that's all you're looking for.